This is going to be an overview of the new tenant manager application within Flowrite. So let's go ahead and log into the tenant manager. As you can see, the URL is called tenantmanager.localhost/cdevworkflow. I'm going to log in with my default login admin. Once I have logged in, the first screen I get is where I can manage all my tenants. So right now you can see all the active tenants. I can also look at inactive tenants and also all tenants. If I go back to my active tenants, you can see that my license for Flowrite is for 20 active tenants, and currently I have 4 active tenants. You can define a new tenant using the create dialog, where all you have to specify is the host name, the database, connection string, and that's it. You can also change the configuration for an existing tenant. You can just select the tenant and click the edit, and you can change the configuration for that particular tenant. You can also test the connection information also for this particular tenant. You can rename a tenant. You can copy a tenant. You can also remove a tenant, and you can launch. Launch meaning you can go to the actual tenant URL and log into that particular tenant. There are also a couple of utilities that we have provided. You can test the connectivity for the selected tenant. You can also change the URL. Let's say you have changed the from a QA to production, or you want to change the URL for each of the tenants. You can, instead of going and changing the URL for each tenant, you can actually say, give me this URL format, and that will go and update all the tenants with the new URL format. You can also set any selected tenant either active or inactive. You can upload an application logo or a login logo file. If you go into this dialog, you will see that please choose a PNG image with high definition or high dimension. Okay, and we will automatically resize it, your logo and all that, to fit application logo. You can also create a tenant database right from our UI. In order for you to do this, you need to have permissions, SQL Server permissions to create the database. The next one is to be able to create all the tables and data that is required for the tenant. And in this dialog, you can give the new database that's already created. And you have two options. One is to either create it based on the template, and the other is to create it based on existing tenant. The next is you can also change the admin password for any selected tenant. And you can see that the dialog is shown, and you can change the password so you can log into any tenant. The next is configuration. The way multi-tenant works within Flowrite is we want you to configure all the configuration items using the tenant manager, and then send those configured items to either all the tenants or either to the selected tenants. So for example, if I go into steps, you can see that I see the normal steps UI that you see normally within Flowrite. And we have also added an extra menu item called multi-tenant, and you will see this on each of the items. So for example, you can select any of these steps, and you can go to the multi-tenant menu and send this step to any of the selected tenants or to all tenants. You can also check and see what tenants have this step. So in this case, I have 4 tenants that are active, and all 4 of them have this step. I can also remove this step from selected tenants or from all tenants, and I can also globalize this step or all steps across multiple tenants or selected tenants. And if you go and look at any other items, for example, if you go into, let's say, data types, you will see the similar menu where you can actually send that data type to multiple tenants. Once we go from the configuration, you will see the status. Under status, we are giving information that is accessible from a configuration perspective for the tenant manager. The specific information managed for each tenant is still available within the tenant UI, but within the tenant manager, you can see version information still. You can see the licensing. As you can see, this particular license is a multi-tenant license, and it's licensed for 20 tenants and for 1,000 users. Next, you can see the database connection string. In this case, the database points to the tenant manager DB, Fluorite tenant DB. You can also see services. We have 7 different services with the version 9.7. We have added this new Fluorite DFS service, which does distributed file synchronization across servers in a distributed environment. From the tenant UI, you are able to also control these services, start them, stop them, only if you have permission for the IIS account that you have access to start and stop services within Windows. You can also look at the caching that we do. This is the system cache for this particular Fluorite tenant, master tenant. The cache should be built for each of the tenants, since each of the tenant can have different configuration settings and different information configured. Under settings, you will also see email configuration. Here you can set up email configuration for the email server, but you can also send that email settings to multiple tenants. In some environment, the same email account is used for multiple tenants, but in some environments, each tenant might have a different email account being used, and that configuration is also possible to do. Same thing with open task and expired task notifications. You can also send this value to multiple tenants, either all tenants or to selected tenants. When it comes to configuration settings, there are specific configuration settings that is global to all tenants. For example, engine settings are now global to all tenants, and these settings will execute each of the engines. And in 9.7, we have also made the engines to auto update their configuration settings, where if you go and add multiple tenants, that tenant configurations will be automatically loaded by the engines every 5 minutes, so the engines are able to process workflows from newly added tenants. And same thing if you make tenants inactive, the engine will remove those tenants also from processing workflows. Next is you will also see the distributed configuration. You also can set up your distributed environment for multiple servers. Here you can turn on or off distributed, and you can also define the role for the server. So for example, if you want to separate the UI from the engine services, you can separate those into 2 separate servers, and you can say in this particular server is for both, or for UI only, or is the workflow server only, and also give a role description for that server. We also have configuration for file synchronization. This tells in milliseconds how often to synchronize files across the distributed file systems. Next is upgrade. The version upgrades, the UI looks similar, but we have done quite a bit of enhancements. As you can see, you just saw the status bar showing what it's processing, and we have considerably improved the performance of the version changes, so you can actually see the version changes against the current tenant manager, but you can also see version changes against other tenants also. On top of that, we have also created bulk version changes where you can actually apply version changes to multiple tenants. You can either select all of them, you can select specific ones and apply the update. And if we go back to the version changes, we have also have an upgrade history now. So when you perform upgrade, you will see on what tenant the upgrade was done, and you can also filter this by tenant. So if I want to see all the upgrades done on Dev2 tenant, I can see all that. I can see what's done on tenant manager. You will see when it was done, what the upgrade version number is, upgrade type, and which tenant it was applied to, and all that information is available. If you expand any of this, more detail will be available. So for example, in this case, we had an error. So you can see the error message also on this particular upgrade item. Next is help. Actually, before we go on to help, we are going to look at users. So these are users that are specific to the tenant manager only. You can add users to this particular UI, but these users can only log into the tenant manager only, not to any of the tenants. The tenant manager also have system-wide logging, so you can see all the error messages right from here and see what the detailed info on each of the error messages are. Here next you have file management. This is a file manager that is able to access the server's file system, and you're able to look at all the different directories and their files, and you will have access to all the tenants also from this particular file manager. The last section is help. On the help section, we have also added quite a few guides. We have updated the configuration manager with the v9.7 information. The tenant manager user manual. This is how to use this particular UI. It's a new user manual included with this, with version 9.7. We have also added a couple of other new guides. We have added a REST API guide. We have also added a OAuth guide, how to use OAuth, how to request for tokens, how to use refresh tokens, and how to make API calls and UI calls using tokens, all defined within this document.